Donald Trump has become the 13th president or presidential candidate in the United States to face an assassination attempt and the 8th to survive. The biggest question in the United States, and a question that will determine global geopolitics, is what impact will this assassination attempt have on this crucial race to the White House? To talk about this rapidly unfolding situation, I'm joined live from New York by Ian Bremmer, president of the Eurasia Group. And I just want to tell our viewers why Ian's perspective is important, because this is his job. He looks at uncertainty, looks at how that uncertainty is likely to evolve and what impact this could have on the here and the now. And this is really a situation where nobody really knows what happens next. And his expertise is really to try and make sense probabilistically of what could happen. So Ian Bremmer, thank you very much for joining us on the News Track. Appreciate your time.
Sure.
I'm sorry about what's
back
happening in the United States.
Thank you.
Didn't really imagine that something like this would happen in a country like the United States in a continuing fashion. I want to start this conversation, Ian, by asking you about the impact that you think this assassination attempt on Donald Trump is likely to have on the race for the 4th of November. Is it now increasingly certain that Donald Trump will most probably be your next president?
Absolutely. This is going to be a very close election. And as you know, most Americans have already made up their minds. A very polarized time. Trump and Biden, both very unpopular, but also radically different kinds of candidates with different visions of America. And so it's not like a whole bunch of Biden supporters are suddenly going to go out and say, maybe I'll vote for Trump now because I'm so impressed with him. No, but the enthusiasm about Trump, the turnout for Trump among his supporters is going to be a lot higher as a consequence of this assassination attempt, and also Trump's incredibly strong response to it. Where for Biden, and as you know, there has been lots of grumbling inside the party that Biden is unfit, especially on the back of a disastrous debate performance only 2 weeks ago. Feels like a lot longer now. 81 years old, very frail, clearly weakening over the last months and year for anyone that spent any time with him. Much less likely that he is going to be forced to step down out of the race because, of course, all of the attention is now, as you just asked me, about the assassination attempt and that implication. So for both of those reasons, it's much more likely that Trump is going to return as president of the United States.
You know, we had Ian Bremmer at one of our events in Mumbai a few weeks ago. This is before the Indian elections, and I asked him about the US elections and whether he was hedging that Donald Trump is likely to win. And he said there's 5 months to go and a lot can happen in 5 months. So just listen to this excerpt from our last conversation with Ian Bremmer, and then we'll talk about what more can happen from there. Here's Ian Bremmer from our event in Mumbai. The biggest political risk globally at this moment is the election in the United States. What's your reading? All the data trackers that we're seeing here seem to suggest that Donald Trump has a slender edge over Joe Biden. Does it seem to you probabilistically that Trump's coming back?
Yeah, but my level of confidence is near zero. I mean, first of all, the elections are 5 months away. I could tell you what's going to happen in Russian elections in 5 months, right? The United States is still a democracy. I mean, it's not a very well-run democracy. It's not a very representative democracy, but it is still a democracy. So I don't know. These men are very old. We have no idea if they're both going to be alive in 5 months, right? I mean, that's still an open question. First applause line for the crowd here. Very interesting. The Indians are clearly rooting for something major to happen in the United States. I'll tell you, we don't know. We don't know. But what we do know is that this election matters a lot. And it matters a lot for the future of U.S. democracy. And it matters a lot for foreign policy in an environment where there are major wars going on, major tensions going on. The future of the United States is far more uncertain on the back of this election than at any point in your and my lifetimes.
Mr. Bremmer, in that last conversation we had, when I pressed you about whether Donald Trump had an edge, whether he would keep increasing the lead over Joe Biden, you were hedging. You were saying that there's still a lot of time to go to November and a lot can happen. From where we've reached, given all the uncertainty at play, what are the other scenarios that you're looking at? What else could potentially happen in this hugely unpredictable race?
Well, as you'll remember, you and I were visiting together in Mumbai with a different race on our mind. It was the Indian election with the final results just about a week away. And at that point, I was saying that there are going to be surprises, and that anyone that thinks that this race is over is really kidding themselves. Now, since then, pretty much everything that could go wrong for Biden has gone wrong. As I said, this was probably the worst debate performance that I've seen in my lifetime in a U.S. presidential campaign. It wasn't that Trump won. It was that Biden lost. He was just unable to appear that he could run the country for another 4 years. And really, there's no one that supports Biden at this point that thinks that this man could be president and effective at 86 years of age, which is what he would be at the end of a second 4-year term. So there were enormous calls for him to leave. And then, of course, you had the shock of the first assassination attempt since 1981 against then-President Ronald Reagan, this close to killing Trump. And then you wouldn't be asking me if Trump is going to win. You'd be asking me who's going to take over the Republican nominee now that Trump is dead. That very easily could have happened. So, I mean, look, the fact that we have this kind of violence in the U.S. election, the fact that we have so much anger, so much disinformation, as I said, I believe that you can now make a much stronger bet that Trump is going to win than you could have when we saw each other a couple of months ago. But I also recognize something that we need to talk about, which is that there are a lot of democracies in the world today, yours in India, the European Union just had their elections, Indonesia this year, Mexico, all over the world, the United Kingdom. And yet the United States is the one major democracy that is truly in crisis, its political system. 75% of Americans say that they believe that democracy is at stake in this election in November. But as you know, they don't agree on why. They think it's the other side. The Trump supporters think it's Biden that's destroying democracy, and that he's the one that is illegally trying to imprison their former president. He's the one whose rhetoric is responsible for the assassination attempt. They believe that. And the Democrats supporting Biden believe that Trump is a dictator who wants to end democracy in the U.S. So the stakes are incredibly high. Whoever wins the U.S. election, the opponents will not accept that as a legitimate outcome. This is really much more than whether or not Trump or Biden is president. It's much more about, do Americans believe in their system, and can the United States persist as a flawed but still representative democracy? I think those are the questions that Americans need to be asking right now. I can assure you that America's allies around the world are asking that question.
There is so much pressure from within the Democrats and even from well-wishers, funders, celebrities on Joe Biden to step aside, given his age. If everyone gets the fact that the president is not capable of serving another 4 years, why is it that the old man insists on hanging in there, and why can't others around him force him to step aside?
Well, first of all, before I answer that question, let's also recognize that an unprecedented number of Americans think that Trump is too old to run. I mean, if we took Biden out of the equation, there was a survey a week ago, again, before the assassination attempt, 50% of Americans responded, actually it was 49, I want to be accurate, 49% of Americans responded that Trump was mentally unfit to serve for another 4 years. If you took Biden out of the equation, that would be unprecedented. You'd say there's no way this guy should stand. 78 years old, frequently mixes up names, gets things wrong all the time. I mean, just at 4 more years of that, you wouldn't make him CEO of anything. So why is Trump standing? But of course, you know, the Republican Party has fallen much more in line behind the individual of Trump. The Democrats are much more willing to express their anger, their dissatisfaction with their candidate. Now, that same survey I mentioned, 49% against Trump, 74% of Americans said that they believed that Biden was unfit to serve for another 4 years, physically and mentally. And again, that is absolutely unprecedented. But Biden has to be willing to step down, and he hasn't been. And you know, the people that have been talking about it, It's not as if it's been a secret. I mean, every head of state and CEO I talked to that's been meeting with Biden over the last year and a half has spoken in various ways about how he has slowed down. In the last week in the NATO summit in the U.S., I had leaders telling me that the last time that he met with Biden, Biden didn't recognize him. This is someone that's met Biden dozens of times. Biden didn't recognize him. And that he's, he doesn't hear well, and that he sometimes, sort of zones out during a meeting. I mean, that's not okay to be president. But you're right. A lot of people have been working to try to convince Biden to step down. Certainly Obama and his advisors quietly. Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker, a little less quietly. George Clooney, but he came out because of a fundraiser in California, and everyone at that fundraiser knew that Biden was just not with it, but no one said anything except for the right wing, using it to weaponize the Trump election against Biden. And so the Democrats were defensive, and they circled the wagons, and they said, no, he's just fine. So I think a combination of loyalty to Biden, Biden's stubbornness, and also the fact that there's so much disinformation on both sides that gets weaponized in this deeply dysfunctional and very long election has made it possible for Biden to still stand in. I want to be clear. I think Biden is very likely to lose. I think if he were to stand aside, another candidate, most likely, almost certainly Kamala Harris, the vice president, because that's who everyone would get behind around Biden, would have a better chance of beating Donald Trump. Is that better chance 50%? No, not right now.
Now, Donald Trump has picked J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, as his running mate and potential vice president. Of the options that were on his plate, what do you think J.D. Vance's selection suggests about the kind of presidency Donald Trump hopes to run?
Yeah, I'm not surprised about that. I was with our friend Fareed Zakaria over the weekend and said I thought Vance was going to get it. And I'll tell you why. Back when Trump was running for president the first time, he didn't think he was going to win. And he knew that he needed a vice president that was going to make him seem more acceptable to a larger number of voters. Someone he didn't necessarily like or respect that much, but nonetheless, he shored up the evangelicals. He was, sort of an adult. He was senior. He had gravitas. The Republican establishment liked him. And of course, I'm talking about Mike Pence. Now, if Biden were concerned that he needs to win, then you'd pick either a moderate businessman like Doug Burgum from North Dakota, Tim Scott from South Carolina, the outspoken senator who is generally liked by most of the Republican establishment. Or if you really want to win and don't mind that there's going to be disagreement at the top of the ticket, then you pick Nikki Haley, who would get lots of independents to turn out, would certainly increase the likelihood that Biden gets thumped in the election. But if you already think you're going to win and you want to go with the person who is most like you, who is most capable of driving your agenda, then you go with J.D. Vance. And Trump has confidence that he's going to win. 39-year-old guy who used to say that Trump was essentially like Satan. He once referred to Trump as America's Hitler, said he was cultural heroin for the American working class. He described himself as a never Trumper, said he was even thinking about holding his nose and voting for Hillary. This is J.D. Vance, right? This isn't a Democrat. And now he's on Trump's ticket. But the thing about J.D., he's very capable. He's very smart. And he is also most willing to hitch his wagon effectively. He's incredibly politically ambitious. He doesn't have any ideological true north. He's very like Trump in that regard. He wants to win. And for Vance and for Trump, it's not about leading the country. It's about winners and losers. And that's the enemy side is your enemy. It's not about public service and bringing the country together. It's about winning at any cost. And it doesn't matter who gets in your way. You knock them down. And I think I know that Trump said that he was going to, after the assassination attempt, give a more unity speech. And I wouldn't be surprised if he does that. You'll remember his first State of the Union back in 2017 was also a unifying speech. It lasted for exactly as long as the teleprompter did, and then he went back to Trump. I think that's what we're going to see here. This is going to be an incredibly divisive ticket. It is going to lean in to making America great again themes, MAGA themes, and America First themes, and it's going to be incredibly polarizing. I think that Vance does not get additional votes for Trump, but Trump doesn't think he needs them. What he gets is a much stronger capacity to run the country the way he wants to. And that's what I think.
So let's spend some time there, because you're saying it's now increasingly likely that Donald Trump will be president again. From the moves he's made in public and from all his statements, what's your best understanding of the kind of president he's likely to be in his second term? And I want you to explain this in the context of U.S. governance and policy in the first instance, and then we'll come to the rest of the world.
Okay, in terms of U.S. governance, I think that the markets, for example, like Trump the first time around, you'll remember they went up when he was elected. Why? Lower taxes, lots of deficit spending, less regulation, more support for CEOs, big industry, less focus on climate change, more focus on allowing American growth, also significant U.S. industrial policy. That is the orientation from a policy perspective. I do think that on the difference with a second Trump administration is that Trump feels much more vindictive this time around. He's been impeached twice, indicted dozens of times, convicted on 34 felonies, and now has faced an assassination attempt. And he blames the Democrats for all of that. He blames them personally. He thinks it's wrong. He thinks what they're doing is illegal. They're politicizing their power. He blames the left-wing media for that, who he refers to as enemies of the people. And I think one of the other things he will do in terms of governance will be to go after those people, to make them into priority enemies. And that means that he will try to politicize and weaponize the Department of Justice, the IRS, and the FBI. Which does potentially lead to a new McCarthyism in the United States, which also considerably strengthens the incumbent party. And this is where you get, Project 2025 that a lot of people have been talking about, and the desire to ensure that the bureaucracy in the U.S. government is politically loyal to Trump. So a big change, and those things will undermine rule of law in the United States.
Is there likely to be a stronger pushback to a Trump presidency in his second term? Because this time everyone knows that he can be around only for 4 more years. The first time around was all unpredictable, unexpected, and therefore no one had their instincts or thought through how to respond. Do you think there'll be a stronger pushback against any potential Trump excesses this time around?
Let's remember that a lot of the pushback came from inside the Trump administration. And so the question will be, will he allow the kind of professionals that don't agree with him and a lot of what he wants to do in the inner circle? I think it is less likely. I think he's learned more lessons over 4 years of governing. You've seen that in the campaign. He's running a much more disciplined campaign this time around than he did before. I suspect that will also play through in terms of governance. Now, more broadly, if Trump wins, it is quite likely that he's going to have a majority in the Senate. By the way, that would be true if Biden wins anyway, because the seats that are up in the Senate this time around, remember, it's only 1/3 of the seats every 2 years for 6-year terms. These seats are more vulnerable for the Democrats, so they likely have the Senate. They might get rid of the filibuster. You now have a Supreme Court that has just ruled that any official act by the U.S. president has impunity, according to the court, and he's likely to have the House. So, the ability for there to be checks and balances on power of Trump will be much more limited in 2025 than they were back in 2017.
What could a potential Trump presidency mean for India and for the rest of the world? How is Trump 2.0 likely to be different from the first version that we saw?
You may remember, you and I have spoken about this on a couple of occasions now. I think that India is one of the few countries in the world that is actually in a very good position with the United States, irrespective of who wins. I think that Modi has a strong relationship with Biden. He has a strong relationship with Trump. You'll remember the Howdy Modi rally in Texas that Trump attended with like 100,000 people. And Trump gets along with Modi quite well. He sees Modi as a strong leader. He's going to have 15 years now of, sort of unbroken, undiminished leadership. Didn't perform as well in the last elections, has to have a coalition. But from Trump's perspective, that doesn't matter one bit. So I don't see a big change in terms of India's direct bilateral relationship with the United States. But around the world is very different. The biggest thing I should mention is that Trump really focuses on tariffs as a tool of U.S. policy. He focuses on trade balances. He wants to have a 60% tariff on all Chinese exports to the United States and a 10% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. from around the world. The Peterson Institute in Washington, D.C., nonpartisan economic group has said that if that was implemented, it would have a 1.8% negative impact on American GDP in the first year. That's pretty significant. So, that would be the biggest near-term impact from foreign policy globally from Trump. Also, the person driving that policy is Robert Lighthizer, former U.S. trade rep under Trump in the first term. He's from Ohio. He's been a big supporter of J.D. Vance, who's also from Ohio. I think it's very likely that Lighthizer becomes Secretary of Treasury now, so that makes these policies more likely to be implemented. More broadly, Trump is a unilateralist. He's not isolationist, so he doesn't like the European Union because it's a multilateral grouping that he thinks can beat up on the United States, and they're stronger in numbers. He liked Brexit. He wants Frexit. He likes Orban from Hungary, likes the Eurosceptics, Le Pen from France. So that'll be a huge tension with European leaders. He also wants the Americans to end the war in Ukraine. J.D. Vance, as well, strongly opposes any further aid to Ukraine. The Republicans, as a party, want to keep that aid going. He wants a ceasefire. Certainly, he'll be more oriented to talk to Putin immediately once he wins the nomination.
So let me pause you for a second to spend a little bit more time on the Russia-Ukraine war. If Trump does what you're saying, which is to cut off funding, put pressure on NATO, not be as friendly with Zelensky and Ukraine, how could that impact the future of the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Yeah, well, it's enormous impact in the sense that the United States is the biggest military supporter of Ukraine, even though all in the Europeans have spent more economically than the Americans have. And so, assuming that Trump wins and he says he wants to end the war, what he does is he tells Zelensky, I'm not going to give you any more support unless you're willing to freeze the conflict where it is, which means the land that Russia presently occupies, they continue to occupy it. You can't do anything about it. Zelensky's not going to support that, but Putin will. Putin will say, sure, I'll talk to you about that. And that puts Russia in a much better position. Now, the other thing about Trump is that unlike Biden, who has made sure that his policies have been aligned with American allies on Russia every step of the way, Trump does not care. He's going to make these decisions himself, and he'll let the Europeans read about it in the New York Times. Or the Wall Street Journal. So the potential that the Europeans get misaligned from the United States on an issue that they consider to be existential, I think is very high.
The other big trend that's playing out is the growing geopolitical divide between China and the United States. Joe Biden has largely taken forward the policies of Donald Trump. But if Trump comes back a second time, do you think the division of the world into two blocks and the trend towards a Cold War 2.0, does that exacerbate? Is that likely? Or will Trump be transactional and business-like and find some way of ensuring the situation doesn't spiral out of control?
Well, I think we don't know. And we don't know for a couple reasons. As you know, the Chinese economy is not performing well right now, and that is a serious problem for them. And that has meant that they have tried to avoid unnecessarily escalating conflict with the U.S. over the last almost 1 year. Now, if Trump comes in and he says, I'm going to hit you with all of these really heavy tariffs, it's possible China throws that playbook out and says, okay, we're going to hit you back, and we don't care if it costs us because we have no choice, and we're going to work to split U.S. alliances because we know a lot of allies don't like Trump, so maybe we can pick some countries off in Europe. Maybe we can pick some countries off in Asia. That's one possibility. Or it might be that the Chinese are so concerned about the impact that this hit will have on them that they say we need to cut a deal with Trump. And Trump is transactional. If he looks like he can get a great deal with the Chinese and look like a winner, he doesn't care that the Chinese are nominally ideological enemies of the United States. He'll say, I can work with them. I mean, for Trump, he truly doesn't care if you're a democracy and authoritarian state. If you've got money, you're going to write a check, you're going to make him look good. Just like when he was a real estate guy. He doesn't care who buys his property. If you've got more money, you're going to get it. You can be a criminal, doesn't matter. So, I mean, that is the way he thinks about the China relationship. And I think there's enormous uncertainty. It's kind of funny because China is the one policy where Trump and Biden have implemented basically the same sort of framework over the last 8 years. But the outcomes of a Trump administration on China could be very, very different.
Lastly, when we spoke last, you said that there are 5 months to go. A lot can happen. Now there are about 3.5 months to go before the elections. It's the most important election in the world, make no mistake. What are the scenarios that you evaluate? What else could still potentially happen, go wrong, go right in either direction? What are the big risk factors that you're looking at this moment?
Look, the Germans had just foiled a plot with the United States for Russia to try to kill the CEO of the leading defense company there. I mean, the potential that this proxy war that the West, NATO, is fighting, supporting Ukraine after the Russian invasion, could get a lot worse. I mean, you could have a Cuban Missile Crisis before November. It's not likely, but it wasn't likely that there was going to be an assassination attempt against Trump. Not because there aren't wackos with guns in the U.S. There are lots of them, but because the Secret Service should have gotten that guy. Like, he was an amateur, but they failed, right? I mean, I could see North Korea that is, deciding that they want to test the nuke, or maybe they, send some missiles into South Korean airspace, and God forbid, maybe there's an incident, maybe someone gets killed. That's a possibility. I mean, I think that there are enormous levels. Biden could die. I mean, he's 81 years old. He could have a massive health incident at the last moment, and he could have a serious heart attack. Who knows? And someone has to replace him, even after the convention. You're right. I mean, this is the fact that the American election takes almost 2 years and costs billions of dollars, is it's a tragedy. It's not the way an election should be run. France, the UK, they just showed the world how you do elections. Short, sweet, everybody respects the other side. Once it's over, you go back to work. That's not where the United States is.
Oh, makes sense. This really is a very complex time for the United States, and I see you're grappling with this at various levels as a citizen, as a voter yourself, and also as a risk analyst in terms of what this means for you, institutionally, individually, and for your country. Ian Bremmer, for taking out time and joining us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.